So, we're here today because we've been kindly joined by Roger Mullin in our brand new spanking Yes Hub, which we have all gathered money for and is going great guns. Thank you for coming along. Roger's here as a private individual, not representing anybody, just himself. And this is not so much a speech and a question and answer session, it's an interactive session. So we'll see how it evolves. We're here to ask questions, we're here to find out, give each other's opinions and find out what anybody thinks about the future. Just a wee bit, I'm begging before we start, there's a donation bucket over there, yes please. We are still looking for monthly sponsors. If you're interested, come and get the bank account details. We take standing orders, we take brass coins, we take yes stones. If you've got any yes stones, probably we'll take anything. So without further ado, Roger Mullin.
Thank you very much. Colin, you were telling me, Colin, that you also take £100 notes.
We do. We do.
So don't feel shy about sharing them. Thanks very much for the invitation to come along. I believe I'm the first guinea pig of this kind of session. So what I'm going to do is, as Colin said, I would prefer just to speak as an individual here, openly, so that although I'm obviously a highly committed member of the SNP, I don't see myself here as speaking for a party or any other position that I may have had in the past. And I think that will make it easier for everybody to participate. Okay. I also have to say, I would like a sort of little cheer from you all to wish my wife well, who has let me out to do this today because she's in the hospital. And this is visiting time, but such is her commitment. She said, I would rather you were at the Yes Hub than visiting me in the hospital. You know, I mean, I think sometimes she would rather I was somewhere else than visiting her in the hospital. So anyway, I will send her your good wishes. I'll be quite happy. I'll talk a wee bit about how I see things, give you a wee bit of background to what I'm doing just now and why it means I've got a little bit of insight into things, although I'm an ex-MP. And I'll be happy to be interrupted at any time, and when I'm finished I'll be happy to have a discussion in any fashion you wish. Is that okay?
Yeah.
As some of you may know, I became active in politics quite a long time ago, in the 1960s, when I first joined as then the SNP. But I didn't join because of any leaflet or having met any candidates or anything else at the time. And this came home to me when a few weeks ago I was being interviewed by James Mitchell, who some of you may know, Professor of Politics at Edinburgh University. And he was interviewing me and he said, right, Roger, I want to know what helped bring people into politics. Right? He says, and I don't want you to, effectively he was saying, I don't want you to give me a lecture on how you see things now that you've been in it for years and inventing a story. As far as possible, be truthful. What do you think spurred you, way back then, when the SNP was next to nothing, had no MPs, what spurred you as a teenager to join? And so when I was thinking about this, I said, I think there were sort of three influences from my very, very early days that came together, and I thought this would be a good thing to do. And those early influences were my mum, my dad, and my older brother. My dad was influential when I was a wee boy. My dad had been, before the Second World War, in a thing called the Territorial Army. He was a baker in Ayr, and he was brought in, and although he had left school at 14, he was like many folk that left school early. He was one of the brightest people, I can honestly say I knew, although he never had any formal education. Right, and was working as an ordinary baker. But the Territorial Army, he had, which he did to get some extra cash, he worked his way up. He was a sergeant, and then he eventually ended the Second World War as a captain, which is very unusual for a working class lad from Ayrshire. But the thing, and he told me many stories about his time in the war, most of which I've completely forgotten. But I remember the thing that as a wee boy that really annoyed me more than anything else was this story I'm going to tell you now. My dad had a Burma Star near the end of the war. He had been over in Burma, which was not the best of places to be in, and the war was coming to an end. And it was, for a lot of people, what are you going to do after the war? Right? And he told me of this thing when, because he was by that stage an officer, not a high-ranked officer, an officer, all the officers were sent application forms to apply if they wished for what they called in those days colonial service. See? And he said one of the first questions was effectively, what private school did you go to? Which immediately ruled him out. You know? And so he said, but he would get other, and he told me this without any bitterness. He gave me the names of majors or colonels and the like who would come to him and ask him to fill out their form so that they could apply to get posting, knowing that him, an ordinary lad from Ayrshire, just couldn't apply. And so I think, as a wee boy, not knowing anything about political theory or anything else, this just annoyed me, the sheer unfairness of how some people, however talented, were prevented from getting on. That's the way in which I saw it. And he told me other stories. He never had a bone of bitterness in his body, however. He was a very quiet man. So there was that. The second thing I mentioned, being perfectly honest about this, my mother influenced me. As one or two of you may know, my Christian name Roger comes from my mother's side of the family. And I think it's 4 or 5 greats' grandfather was a man called Hugh Roger who taught Robert Burns. And so growing up in Ayrshire, my mother I can always remember as a wee boy, my mother used to always sing me Scottish songs as we were going to bed. And I got interested through her in what you might call, what we call today, the sort of cultural life of Scotland, the songs, the poetry and the like. So I had this happening. And then I was the baby of the family, as you can tell. You know, my brother was 8 years older than me. You know, and we lived in a wee town called Maybole, and the school there, still there to this day, is called Carrick Academy. And he went along, and he was very bright, as was my sister, who was 4 years older than me. Nobody in either my father's side or mother's side of the family had any post-school education of any sort, let alone a university education. But anyway, my brother wasn't too good at making decisions. He couldn't decide which hires to do at school, so he did 11. Which I've never met anybody else who did that. He did 5 hires in his 5th year, and then went back to 6th year and did 6 hires in his 6th year. So he was reasonably bright. He then went on the first time to university and got a double honours degree in maths and physics. So, and all the family was very proud of him. And couldn't get a job in Scotland. Right. Worse than that, he went for an interview for a job. I can't remember now the big company's name, but he went for an interview of the job, and one of the questions he was asked, he said informally, not in the formal interview, but in the informal chat, he was asked if he was a member of the Masons. And so he thought, there's something not right here. But anyway, he couldn't get a job. He had never had any ambition to emigrate in his life, as far as I'm aware. But the only job offer he eventually got was from the Atomic Energy of Canada. So I remember to this day going up my dad's car to see Jimmy sail, as you did in those days, from Greenock, and the Empress of Canada, sailing off to get a job in Canada. By the time my brother was 30, he was the Secretary of the Science Council of Canada. He went on to become Vice President of the International Development and Research Corporation of Canada, which basically handled all the technical scientific work that was international in nature, research in nature. In much more recent times, in the early 1990s, he was asked to go to South Africa after the first democratic revolution, met Nelson Mandela, and helped write the first science and technology policy for a free South Africa. Right. Now, this kind of, as a young man, as a teenager then, I knew it influenced my dad, so I had this feeling of there's something far wrong with our society, the way in which people can have talents and ability, but that wasn't enough. They had to be part of a particular set or class before they get on. So that annoyed me. I had my mother's influence in terms of the culture, the songs, the poetry of Scotland, and that kind of interest. Just by the way, when I was going through university myself, I did a one-man show of the life and times of Robert Burns to help pay my way through, you know. However, my age precludes me from doing that convincingly. And then, of course, I was 14 when my brother emigrated, and I thought, what a ridiculous waste that my very talented brother is not able to get an opportunity in Scotland. So these were the early influences in me, and I was kind of interested in politics, so that led me into, one day, getting a bus in Maybole as a teenager and going all the way to Ayr, and for some reason I found out there was a branch of this thing called the SNP, and I went along and I joined. I think that it was either 1965 or 1966. I was still at school at the time. And I can happily say I joined before the Hamilton by-election. So I'm sure many of you are involved in the Yes movement more generally. If you're honest with yourself, you will have your own different cultural, social, other influences upon you that have made you take the step of joining. We're not all the same. And I think that is a good thing, that we're not all the same, that there are different influences. And we should recognise that. And I think I am, if anything, more passionate now, all these years later, about the need for Scottish independence and creating a new political system for the people of Scotland to have greater influence in their own lives and their own destiny than I was away back then. And I think that is showing itself more generally in the way in which this has now become a mass movement, not merely an idea that is the ownership of one party, but is a mass movement. Inevitably, you're going to get people with very different conflicting views of what they want to create. But I remember I used to do a bit of teaching at Edinburgh University many years ago, and I remember once sitting down with a wee tutorial of, I think it was second year students, and somebody was saying, oh, it's terrible when people argue. Arguing is the worst thing that can happen. And because it was a sociology class, I said, this German sociologist called George Simmel would not have agreed with you. I said, because what he said many, many years ago, he said, if you look at the composition of groups in society, whether they're very small groups, or very large groups, right? If people are arguing, at least they've got a motivation to be concerned about something that they want to see a resolution to. He said, the most destructive things in groups or society is apathy. It's when when people are not engaging, that's more destructive to the progress of mankind than when people are arguing about the best way in which to do something. So I've never been one that's worried about there being disagreements and debates and arguments within the movement. In many ways, I think that is a healthy thing, and that should be part of any healthy democracy. And I see that. I mean, there are times people fervently disagree with some of my views and issues, and sometimes they agree with me, and that's fair enough. So how do I see it? So that's a bit about me. How do I see things progressing now? Where do I think we're at? Well, there's something interesting that's happened to me since I stopped being an MP, and that is I can't get myself away from doing things in London, which is in some ways very sad, but it also means, I mean, I think I've got it here, you get, I mean, one of the advantages which I never knew about of being defeated is you get this from Parliament. See, this is, and I've got this until March 2023, and I think I'm probably able to renew it. And this gives me access to Westminster environments, all except the speaking chamber, as a former member. Right? And what I didn't understand was that some of the activities that go on in Westminster, once you have been an MP, if you choose, you can continue to be active in all sorts of ways. So after I was defeated, not having been terribly aware of this, after about 2 months, I was contacted by a guy called Nigel Elway, who was the secretary of an all-party group that I used to chair, which is called now the All-Party Group for Explosive Threats, dealing with things like IEDs, improvised explosive devices, landmines, and the like. I had ended up, having been elected as an MP after a few months, becoming the chair of this body, just because of informal conversations I'd had about some of the work I had done in different parts of the world before becoming an MP. Anyway, there I was defeated, thinking, well, that's over. I got this call, and they said, at the first meeting of the APPG, they want to offer you a representative post to continue to represent the APPG, different things, you know. And they said, we've thought of this great title for you. We want to make you the special envoy, particularly for the Middle East. I said, well, what? Who wouldn't want to go back to northern Iraq or the Yemen? I said, you know. As some of you may know, if you follow wee bits in Facebook, you will know that in March 2017, one of the last things I did before the general election where I was defeated was I actually led a small delegation over to northern Iraq, and I was I think the only parliamentarian who entered the city of Mosul during the conflict. And when I came back and I put up a post about what I had been doing there in my Facebook page, I was immediately attacked by an individual who continues to attack me for going on a jolly to Mosul. So I'm the man that's gone on a jolly to Mosul. But I have then continued, and it means I have those contacts. And more recently, there's been a spin-off organisation, the first one ever, I believe, in Westminster to this all-party group. They've set up a charitable type limited company so that it can do more work internationally of this type, because there are some restrictions on what a parliamentary group can do. So to remove itself of that, work closely with that, and they've asked me to be I'm the first chair of that. And so I'm continuing to work there. I've also been asked to give wee bits of advice to different groupings in Parliament. So the long and the short of it is, I'm probably up and down to London and in Westminster for 1 or 2 days every month, which is absolutely fascinating watching what's going on now in the political scene. As I was saying to Colin just a short time ago, I don't know what's going on in politics at many levels at the moment. And I can assure you, nobody down there knows what's going on either. I mean, the uncertainty that you see reported in the press is as of nothing compared with the uncertainty that's down there, including amongst governing party, Tory MPs and the like, about what is actually going to happen. Right? And that in itself, of course, you might say, presents us with an opportunity, but it presents us too with a huge difficulty and a challenge. So when some people have said to me, why don't you just have India F2 now? You will remember that in the independence referendum that's held the first time around, the First Minister was able to persuade David Cameron that this would be an official referendum. It went through the appropriate legislative routine to get it recognised, and then it could be held. It was a formal referendum, and nobody could gainsay its legitimacy. Right? We can all argue about whether people played by the rules or the like, but as a creation, it was legitimate. The problem at the moment is we don't know who's going to be the Prime Minister. Literally from 1 week to the next. We don't know if there are going to be other things come beforehand, such as will there be a snap general election? Will there be a people's vote on Brexit? Although I think the chances of that are extremely remote. But nonetheless, there's all sorts of uncertainty around. And you have the current Prime Minister making it very clear she won't even have proper discussions with the First Minister about a referendum. It's actually quite unlike what took place before the referendum the first time around. This creates a difficulty. You know, and some people have said, well, why don't we just declare a referendum? You couldn't, in a sense, see the Scottish Government trying to do that, but they would be open to all sorts of different legal challenges, for example, about the funding that would be required for it. And there would be, it would open yourself up if you did an informal referendum as to what the other side would do if they thought they might lose. I've not seen this discussed, but if you look internationally at tactics that are used, if you look at what's happened in the past in Catalonia, the easiest thing would be for the opposition, the knowers, to say, this is not legitimate, so we're advising people not to take part. In other words, to adopt a stance that undermines its legitimacy. And, you know, there are these and many other dangers as to what's going to happen. So at the moment, things are very uncertain as to how things will go forward.
There's not a court case going on somewhere down in England just now about exactly that, talking about and they're waiting for the result of the English legal system overcoming or telling us what to do in Scotland with their own.
I think system. What you may be referring to is the case that has now reached the Supreme Court, which is being raised against the actions of the Scottish Government putting forward a bill in relation to Brexit, which has still got to come to a final judgment. So,
how's that looking?
Well, the establishment very often looks after its own. So, what I would say is, it wouldn't surprise me if, as it were, our side didn't win that. But nonetheless, I think in one sense we win regardless of what the judgment is if we handle it correctly. If they say no, the Scottish Parliament doesn't have the right to do what it wants to do, which is effectively to protect the interests of the Scottish people, that becomes a huge campaigning opportunity for us. right? If we win the case, it legitimises that the Scottish Government have been right in seeking to increase its powers through action and the like. So I'm not too worried in that sense about what the ultimate judgment is, because I think if we're clever, we can use it to our advantage. But it is a very good example that you raise of how these things can get mired in legalities and can get mired in challenges. And so, from the point of view of Indirect 2, there is just a lot of uncertainty at the moment as to what the best way, technically and legally, would be to go about it, so that we are not subjecting ourselves to unnecessary threats from the opposition. And in the midst of this, you know, I was a member, I suppose my good friend here, I was a member of the SNP at a time when our policy used to be, because of what was said from Westminster, the policy used to be, and I think this was confirmed by Margaret Thatcher, that you will only get independence after you elect a majority of MPs. And so the policy of the SNP used to be, years ago, we need to get a majority of MPs elected and then we'll negotiate. What we will then have is, after the negotiations and we set up a constitution, we will put the constitution to the Scottish people to be ratified in a referendum at the end of the process. But because of the actions of others and because of the way in which referendum began to develop in the use in the UK, the policy was changed to have what we will do is have a referendum first, which is what they've done on Brexit. But it's not always been like this. And who knows what dynamic is going to be created, what will happen in the future. Right? Who knows what's going to happen if there is another quick general election. Right?
If they have a no-deal Brexit and they turn around in January and tell us Holyrood's closed because we've taken back control, what do we do?
Well, I don't think
have you heard about that in London?
I don't know. I don't think there's any thought about they will close Holyrood. I think what they're likely to do is drag out and make sure the powers that we would have thought under the Scotland Act should go back to Holyrood won't all go back to Holyrood, and they'll hold on to those as far as possible. And because they have got, because of the control Westminster have over the major levers of development, particularly the economy, the biggest danger to me is how they will use their powers that they already have to the detriment of Scotland. I mean, I basically think, I mean, as some of you may know, I set up a wee company and have done some research into Brexit and Scottish business and the like. And I've been going around different parts speaking about it. It's astonishing the lack of preparedness that the UK government have in relation to this. When myself and my co-director Michelle published our interim report a year ago, right, one of the first things that happened was we got a call from Brussels, from a policy advisor, saying, this is really good that you're doing this, but why is the government not doing anything? Right? When we published our final report in, when was it, February, we get phone calls from, amongst other places, the Belgian embassy in London.
This is the Westminster government you're talking about?
Yeah, the Westminster. No, not Scotland. Why the UK government not doing any of the preparations? This is their bag after all, you know. And so myself and Michelle were invited into the Belgian government, and they invited representatives of the Flanders government over to speak to us in London on the back of our report, because they said to us, we cannot get anybody in the UK government thinking about some of the basic problems that business is going to face in relation to Brexit, which I thought was kind of utterly astonishing, but nonetheless tells you something about the complete lack of preparedness of the UK government to this day. The lack of preparedness for all sorts of things.
Is it that, or is it just arrogance from their part?
Well, I think in part when David Cameron decided for his own party political reasons that the way in which he thought he would lance the boil would be to have a referendum, I don't think he ever thought. I don't think he thought
That
he
boil
was
being
going to look
UKIP.
that boil being in part UKIP and in part his own Tory branches, the John Redwoods and the like of this world, the bastards as John Major called them. So we can get that sorted. And so they did absolutely no planning at all as to what's going to happen if there's going to be a vote to change, to leave, right? So whatever you think of the content, nobody can deny that well before the Scottish referendum, a lot of effort was made by the Scottish Government to produce a substantial white paper and other papers that was put in the public domain months and months before so that there could be a proper debate. There was nothing prepared at all by the UK government. And to this day, there's still nothing of substance being put forward. In the last couple of days, it's become very clear that what I would call their trade backstop of the extreme Brexiteers, that is, doesn't matter if there's a no deal because we'll fall back on WTO rules. Right?
Not allowed.
No,
They're not allowed.
And as we said in our report way back, the WTO rules the schedules come in different forms. Simply, I'll try and simplify this as best I can. You get some fairly simple, straightforward schedules that says if you're manufacturing widgets, it's 8% on widgets, the tariff, it's 40% on chicken or whatever it may be. So you get those kinds of schedules. But you then get schedules that are what I would call volume schedules. These actually apply to frozen chicken, if my memory serves correctly. And that is, the EU has got a quota agreed that it can import so many thousands of tons of the stuff in any 1 year at a price that is advantageous, right? But these are set at the EU level. So the UK can't just adopt EU schedules easily. What they have to do is negotiate first with the EU to get their agreement. They can do that. Secondly, in the WTO, the World Trade Organization, there has to be unanimous agreement. And the way in which it happens is a proposal is put down by a member state, and it's given, I think it's 3 months. It sits there to see if anybody is going to object to it. The UK government put down their proposal, the WTO, in July, and so far I think it's in excess of 20 states have registered disquiet. Right? These include Russia, the USA, China, New Zealand,
Japan.
Yeah, Japan. So it's not going to be. So the assumption was, in a no-deal situation, we just automatically fall back onto agreed WTO rules. Was never going to be as simple as they claimed, but it's now being made clear it's just not going to be as simple as that. Exactly where that ends up, I don't know. Nobody knows where it will end up, but it's not as simple and straightforward as people have been trying to imagine. That creates all sorts of challenges and difficulties economically. I mean, I put out a wee tweet the other day about the budget that was held yesterday, and I said, this is the hors d'oeuvre budget before we get the Brexit budget, because this is a budget that's created without knowing what's the situation going to be in a few months' time.
Could it not be interpreted as a budget prior to a new snap election? Or these tax cuts for the rich in England?
It can't possibly be, because Theresa May said today that no, it was
Oh,
not.
right. Traditionally, that's what they do.
Yeah, I always remember.
Traditionally, they set up
I always remember.
sweeteners.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could look at things cynically like that, but as you know, I'm never cynical about these things. But I mean, yeah, I mean, if you were thinking, given the budgets that they're going to be able to deliver over the next few years, this is probably the easiest one before they have to address the consequences of Brexit. So if you were looking at it in that way, right, you would say that Hammond, although it doesn't get on, there are not good relations between him and the Prime Minister, at a personal level, nonetheless, he's done her a favour in that he opens up the option that they have something to run on in a broadly positive way from their angle if there were to be a snap election. I don't think they're planning for a snap election in the sense that they're wanting it, but who knows how things are going to unravel in the next few weeks.
Do you think come January we'll actually, do you think we'll actually have a deal, or do you think it'll be a no deal Brexit? Because I've got one opinion as to what she's doing.
Well, I'm sure we all have, and I mean, I'm sure Theresa May's got multiple opinions of what she's doing.
Not personalities.
What morning is it? What am I going to feel today? I mean, there is it's difficult to exaggerate the feeling when you're down there and talking to people of the complete and utter uncertainty there is about everything, including those, I mean, people I know who, I mean, I get on reasonably well with a guy called Steve Baker. Now, I think Steve Baker's, in some of his views, is a bit bizarre, but he was a very intelligent Conservative backbencher when I was there as an MP, who eventually, after the general election, got put in place, I think, as number 2 to David Davis in the Brexit department, and subsequently has resigned by him. But if you talk to him, I mean, they don't know what's going on. You know, and they've still got, I mean, they might be outside the government and cabinet, but they've got a lot of very good friends inside the cabinet and inside government. I mean, I think that although I have no sympathy for the position they've taken, I think politically, my view of this, I've not seen really, well, I don't think any commentators agree with me because I've not heard anybody say what I'm going to say to you now. But I think they played this very cleverly as a group of Brexiteers. I think what they've done is agreed half of us are going to resign and half of us are going to stay in. And that means we know exactly everything that's going on at the same time as we're able to campaign against. And I think May is hamstrung now because she can't turn around and sack the remaining Brexiteers from cabinet, because I think the inevitable thing would be she would fall within a matter of days if she attempted to do that. Right? And it means that what's happening in government is being fed to the main opponents and the Tory side. So the split amongst the Tories is not to be under-exaggerated. You know, equally, I would say, you know, in one sense, the big failure of trying to secure something more sensible in all of this is actually, I think, the shameful way in which Corbyn's Labour Party, particularly their front bench, have been behaving over it all. You know, so they've effectively sold a pass to allow them to go on without the type of scrutiny and challenge that I think an official opposition should have been supplying. But I mean, all this creates, I mean, everybody's waiting to see what will happen. Right? Which is why, although there's tremendous turbulence and uncertainty, it is not of the type where you get a very clear view of how do we get ourselves out of this. You with me? Because so many different things could happen over the coming months. that I think it's very difficult to see a very clear strategy forming at the moment.
Right.
No, we're not, we're in a chat.
No, I didn't want to listen. I won't
If reports
Don't want to listen, he could be the Prime Minister.
If reports are correct, you say they're not preparing for anything, but they seem to be preparing for Scotland, with Mundell getting a bigger budget, 3,000 staff, if these reports are correct, and a big building in Leith. And
It is a big building.
maybe and the likes of maybe the power's coming back to Mundell and his alternative government. How would that play? Is that right?
Well,
Fracking's going to start.
I
Things that
I don't think what they're going to do is set up an alternative government. That's what I would say at the moment. But I do think, in the Tories' own mind, there is now a great flux constitutionally of how they will choose to manage things in the longer run post-Brexit.
which means get rid of Hood.
Well,
And
I don't think that. I think
I don't
the
think that's
easiest
gonna
answer is to just make it more and more difficult for the Scottish Parliament to represent Scotland's interests. It's sort of death by 1,000 cuts. That's far easier
Sandy.
than a bold step up.
Sandy,
Yes,
I'll get from here.
so as I say, the honest answer is I don't know what's going to happen. What we've got to do is think through how we might respond depending upon all the different possibilities. But there's not much time. We're exiting the EU at the end of March, which is no time away.
what about the Senate of the Eighth laws and all these things? that,
Yeah, well, what
the Parliament has?
Right. Well,
The
basically,
king who ruled before there was ever a union. And those laws should not be formed part of the present union we've got, the 1707
the
union. But they're sticking that to us as well.
well, basically what they're doing is in Parliament is they're getting up to use what's called secondary legislation to push through a lot of the legislative changes by avoiding the normal form of scrutiny in Parliament. The way in which, if you take, for example, what's going to happen in terms of the budget, there'll be, following in the wake of the budget, there will be a finance bill, right, to put in law the changes that the Chancellor has announced that he wants to do, right? The finance bill will be read the first time. There will then be a big set-piece debate, probably for about 3 days, where Parliament can argue about it, right? And there will be some votes. It will then go into a special bill committee. It will go into the Finance Bill Committee. And what the Finance Bill Committee will do is it will allow primarily other parties other than the government to put forward possible amendments or what they call new clauses into the bill, and these will be debated in a committee. The committee will normally meet, if it was a normal period, it would meet twice a week for about 4 to 6 weeks before it gets right through the committee stage. It would then, and so there would be a lot of debate, there would be the possibility of amendments, and then it would go back to the House of Commons, and there would be the final stage, which is basically called third reading stage, where there would be less of a debate, but still a debate in the chamber, and there would be further votes. Right? Votes are always heavily restricted in the House of Commons because of the way in which you've got to vote. Right? So there are very few votes actually take place on amendments, right? Because it takes 20 minutes to vote rather than pressing a button. I was once sitting there reading for us in the finance bill. And, I was only there 2 years, but I survived going through 3 budgets. And in one of them I was sitting there, and when it got to the final stage, the report stage, the third reading stage, it had been agreed in advance that as the third party we would be allowed to put 2 amendments to this colossal bill to the vote. 2. And then I was sitting there, and just before I got up to make my speech, the Tory chief whip, chief whip, came over to speak to Mike Weir, our chief whip, sitting next to me in the front, and he basically said, Mike, talk to the Speaker, you're only going to be allowed 1 vote because of the time. So when Roger stands up, he's got to state which one you're voting on. So there, I was left sort of myself, standing up making a speech and being forced to effectively make party policy on the hoof to decide what's going to the vote. So very few things are actually voted on because it takes 20 minutes to vote. Now, but although there are huge flaws in the system, as I've described it, you would see it takes weeks for a bill to go through all these different stages and to be debated. What is being proposed now is that a lot, possibly more than 1,000 legislative changes are going to be made without such scrutiny. And what they're going to do is they're going to put it through things that we call a delegated legislation route. Now, what happens there, instead of all this kerfuffle that I've described, what happens there is something goes into a delegated committee can be called at very short notice, right? The whips have to nominate who are going to be members, and you go along to that, and I've sat in a few, and they last about half an hour. So you get a chance to ask a few questions, and then is it all agreed? Yeah, it's all agreed, or not. So the process of scrutiny is effectively removed to all intents and purposes by using the type of way in which they're threatening to use the delegated legislation.
So we're calling it at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, what it does is it gives even more power to the government to control what's going through than even the current process.
Now, we know the government, the UK government has that power. We know that Westminster is corrupt and corrupting. How do we get to a point where people of Scotland are making a choice about the future?
Yes.
If that power, Westminster, continually refuses us the opportunity
Yeah.
to exercise it.
Right. Well, my personal view is that that's where gatherings like this, and hopefully that will increasingly gather throughout the rest of the country, become very important. I know only too well from my short stint as an MP how difficult it can be to engage in wider involvement in a movement when you're tied up. I mean, your time is tied up so much in other things that you are expected to do as a parliamentarian, right? Sitting in bill committees, taking part in debates, taking part in all sorts of meetings and the like. And the same is true, although it's very different, you know, I've got every sympathy for MSPs as well. They have a whole range of responsibilities. It means that there are constraints on how much you're going to do entirely simply through elected representatives alone. I think they're very important, but it's not going to be, in my judgment, sufficient. That's why I've been very happy to speak at whatever yes groups want me to speak, because I think both the party, the SNP that I'm a member of, and also the wider yes movement, has got an important role to play now in effectively starting to really campaign and open up and engage with people. One of the most powerful things we know from all sorts of research, and that Randall, as my former election agent, knows only too well, is the power of actually talking to people face to face, whether it's in the high street, whether it's chapping indoors and the like. When I was elected the first time around, we managed to chat on huge number of people. How many doors did we chap out in the first election?
More than one.
More than one. A lot more than 10,000 as well. Right? And that combined with quite a lot of high profile, quite a lot of street activity when we had special publications and we were chatting to people in all the different communities, that was very important. One of the things that I would say we found out was with the snap election, we weren't able in any way to replicate that type of engagement. And, you know, we may have lost my seat because you had a lousy candidate, but it's also possible, it was also possible that we lost it because we were not able to have that intensity of engagement, because, broadly speaking, the reason we lost was thousands of people who voted us at the previous election sat on their hands. They didn't come out to vote against us, they just didn't vote.
I think there was a case that, and I know two people have said exactly the same thing tonight. Such a big majority, obviously Roger's going to win, and didn't vote. And I think there was apathy throughout the whole community. As I actually said to Bill earlier on, there was a complete apathy throughout the whole community.
Yeah, and to be honest, you know, whoever is going to be the candidate and whenever the general election is, I think politically, you know, we have to make sure independence is absolutely at the forefront of the campaign. I personally think, looking back at this with the advantage of hindsight, one of the mistakes that I made, and I would think this was made the length and breadth of the country, was that we were a bit taken aback and didn't respond properly to all the fear stories about Indiref 2 and all the rest of it that did the Tories so much good. So I think they get too much of a free hand. I think we always need to recognise we need to motivate our own support to get them out. And so if I was giving advice the next time around to whenever the general election is, I would say, got to remember the lessons of 2015 as well as 2017, and Scottish independence and looking after the interests of the Scottish people has to be foursquare at the forefront.
I think you're absolutely right, Roger. I think that's why voters didn't turn out last time when they were defeated, because the SNP didn't talk enough about independence. People that joined the SNP post-referendum, the reason we got so many voters in 2015, because the SNP was talking about independence. We did enough in the last election.
The Tories, on the other hand, talk only about not having independence. Every leaflet, that's all it said.
Yeah.
And they got seats on the strength of...
Oh, they got... And there wasn't enough challenge to the position they were taking.
Challenge.
And so, yeah, and I mean, I take responsibility for that locally. I was the sort of standard bearer locally, and, you know, I think that was a strategic error. And I think, you know, whether you're going to win or lose the next time around, what we've got to remember is, what are we in this for, right? We're not in it really to get any specific individual elected to a particular position, right? I would see being elected to be a standard bearer is so that you're able to take forward the case for the things that you fundamentally believe in. To me, that is Scottish independence, right? And so what we've got to make sure is that we don't lose that sense of our overriding purpose. And I think, you know, I felt more frustrated. I mean, I've lost quite a few elections in my time. Right? I first stood in February 1974, right, where I had a celebration party, which was announced on television, when a political commentator at the time said he had been talking with the night election results, and the young candidate in South Ayrshire said that if he saves his deposit, they will have a party. So he says, I can now announce he can have a party. And so, like, saving your deposit was a big deal way back then. We've moved on, but what we need to do is, you know, back then when things were much more difficult, I didn't have any reluctance about saying foursquare the campaign is about ultimately achieving Scottish independence. We've got to, as it were, get back to that spirit of being undeterred by opponents trying to compromise the main strengths of why we
So
get
if there
together.
was another general election, even though we started, we were talking about legitimacy, so if the SNP put something in their manifesto that says if we get one more over the halfway mark of the MPs elected, we'll declare an independence, would that be legitimate? In your view?
I think the state of politics today is such that that would not be seen in the mind of the wider public, because we have moved into an era where referenda are used for big constitutional changes, not just here, but in other parts of the world. So that would have been an easier argument to have had in the 1950s and 1960s. I just don't think it carries the same weight today because of changes that have taken place in politics. So it does mean we need to think about how best we use the election of people to elected posts to dovetail more with the drive to get another referendum to give the people of Scotland a choice, this time being able to reflect on what they were told the last time.
Well, they voted for a mandate for when we know what Brexit is in the Scottish Parliament. They voted for another referendum. So where do we stand on that?
Triple lock mandate, isn't it? We've
Yeah,
got
I think
majority in Westminster, majority in Holyrood, and there was a vote in Holyrood, and thanks to the Greens, it passed. So there's a triple lock mandate for independence. Now, why aren't we using it? Are we going to wait on black money, dark money coming in?
no.
Get rid of Alexander, get rid of Angus, get rid of anyone that stood up in the last Parliament from the 56 MPs we had down there and said something against the government or against Jeremy Corbyn. They've gone. They took them out. They took out Angus. They took out the lassie from Perth, Tasmina. Okay, these parliamentarians that stood up and took them on, gone. It's like a warning. Get back in your box, Scotland. Come on,
Well, I mean,
this is what they're playing at. So how do we counter that?
yeah, well, as I
Triple mandate, we've
yeah,
got it.
well, I go back to the point I made. We have to make sure that we all understand that everybody in this room is as important in prosecuting this case for Scottish independence as any MP is, as any MSP is. Right? What we've got is a huge challenge in our hands to achieve what we all want to achieve.
Get it out there.
And we need to get it out there. So I think at the end of the day in politics, at the end of the day it's not so much about the legalities or triple locks or whatever. At the end of the day it's about creating sufficient momentum amongst a population that they cannot be denied. And we've not got there yet.
There was 193,000 in Edinburgh.
There was, well, and it included me, and that was great.
Wasn't it?
Yeah.
Great feeling.
It was a great feeling.
Walking down the Royal Mile.
And they're all going to vote yes. But it's nothing like enough.
Not yet.
Right? So what we need to do is, I mean, wouldn't it be great if those 90,000 or however many it was, for all those people who were willing to sacrifice a Saturday to go out and march and enjoy the march, wouldn't it be great if in the same numbers they were willing to go out and leaflet and chap on doors and all the rest of it? Then I would think we would be talking.
Wasn't
Right?
that
We can't, we're not able to generate those numbers at the moment, right? And it's got to start somewhere. So I think what you're doing here is very important. So you mustn't underestimate how important you all are to this wider cause.
Wasn't that point well made by Dave Llewellyn when he did the march from Portree to Edinburgh? He said the purpose of the march wasn't to convert people from no to yes. It was to convert people from yes to yes activists.
Yeah, I think that's very important. I mean, we know that we can turn out big numbers for rallies. Right? We know that the SNP has a big membership. But neither the people who turned out for rallies nor the membership of the SNP are anything like turning up to do the hard graft at the moment. And it's difficult. It's not much fun in an evening chapping in a door or chapping in 6 doors in a row and getting people
But in
rejecting you.
2014, there was huge numbers went out and chapped the doors. Until it's put into the test, we're not going to know if they're going to go out and chap the doors.
Yes, I think what my point is we need to be doing it now. What we can't do is rely on a very, very short campaign to do it.
But we don't have answers.
I know.
They've told us it's so uncertain. It's down in London at the minute. You can't give us an answer. So how can we sell a product to people who are just going to throw MSM back in our faces?
That is a great difficulty, the uncertainty. The only thing we know is that some aspects of that uncertainty are going to be resolved in the coming weeks. Right. Not all of it, but some. I mean, for example, we don't know at the moment if it's going to be just, in inverted commas, a hard Brexit or a no deal. Right? That would strike me as pretty important. Right? Because that will tell us exactly what the nature is of the challenge that Scotland faces as a community, and politically and economically, that will allow us to inform the way in which we engage with people.
There is another possibility, of course, and that is that Article 50 can be withdrawn. That's going through the European Court of Justice right at the moment.
That's right.
And that would change everything.
And the Scottish Government's behind that. Is that correct?
One of the
One
of the sponsors of that, I think, is Joanna Cherry. One of the main people. Pardon? And Alan Smith. But I mean, it's not just an SNP thing. It's a wider.
That could only happen if the current government falls, because the current government is not going to agree to an extension of Article 50 because they've got too many people wanting them to just get on with it, as they say. So how on earth is there going to be a parliamentary majority for that, particularly when Labour is not keen?
If there is to be a intelligent vote,
I'm putting you in charge of this. Randall, you're in charge of intelligent voting.
One of the options will have to be Theresa May says, this is what I've done, and otherwise we're going to fall out. And if the ECJ has said Article 50 can be withdrawn, then it's a three-way vote. And your MPs are going to have to say, we've got disaster, even worse disaster, or let's stay where we are.
It was some that said a no deal was better than a bad deal. So,
I know. But I mean, what Randall is effectively saying is, as things stand at the moment, if there was a new referendum called if they were forced into it. The problem is, it's of no use to many of us if that people's vote is accept the deal or go for a no deal. Right? For it to be a proper people's vote, there has to be the equivalent of the withdrawal of Article 50, which effectively means having on the ballot paper we want to remain. Right? And, you know,
and Nicholas was right in saying that that was you know, that had to be in it if the SNP...
Well, she's made it quite clear that from the SNP point of view, a people's vote is only meaningful if it includes the option of remaining. You know, if the people's vote is a vote between accepting whatever is negotiated or a no deal, that is not worth the bit of paper it's written on. You know, because it's really saying to people, you know, you've got to take it or leave it. I mean, and of course, as some commentators have said, the way things are going at the moment, there's maybe not going to be a huge difference between a negotiated deal and a no deal, the way in which things have been progressing, you know. So you don't want a devil in the deep blue sea referendum. You want a referendum if it's going to be meaningful. That's why, I mean, that amongst other reasons is why I doubt there's going to be a referendum on the deal. Right? And what you've got to remember is there are many people in Westminster, including on the Labour benches, who are entirely wedded to the idea of parliamentary sovereignty. In other words, are quite happy if they feel they're getting the ultimate vote taking place in Parliament, right? That they're sceptical about people, whereas it comes naturally to many folk from Scotland to assume that sovereignty resides with the people. So it's easier to say, well, we would want to be there to people, but you're going to get there are lots of people in Parliament who want to see power residing still exclusively within the elected representatives in Parliament.
But then it's passed up to the Lords and they're not. And the SNP don't acknowledge the House of Lords. And the House of Lords with their 800...
Well, we acknowledge them, we just don't appoint anybody to it. I mean, the House of Lords is there in terms of the system. But for many, many years, the SNP have said, although in parliamentary terms, it is to your disadvantage not having representation in it. They've said in a matter of principle, because we don't agree, we won't have anybody in the House of Lords. Right? But of course the House of Lords has got a role to play, but they can be overruled through a Parliament Act by the Commons. So they don't have anything like the same ultimate power as the Commons has. I'm glad I've cheered you all up.
What would you think? I mean, this has never really been discussed, but it has been mooted by various people, mostly in England, about they keep banging on about, well, Scotland's not getting independence, but they are beginning to come round to they would like their independence from the other three nations that make up the United Kingdom. Do you think that would ever come to pass? Do you think Parliament or Mrs May, because she seems to be making all the decisions now, would ever allow that?
Well, I'll answer it in this way, and it's back to some of the comments that were made earlier, and some of the questions made earlier. I do think there is a sense in which many people in the Tory, and I would have to say in some of the Labour benches, are in political system terms highly centralist. In other words, they do think it's a bit of a nuisance having a parliament in Scotland and assemblies in Wales and Northern Ireland. And so they would want, I mean, there are some people who would be keen to see everything run. And because we don't have a federal system, it doesn't recognise the rights. It doesn't give any rights to nations, right? So And given the imbalance in the UK, where 80% of the population are all based in England, understandably, if you have a centralised system that doesn't recognise the rights of other nations, it means inevitably England's will is, in the vast majority of cases, what matters, right? And I don't see any desire on the main Westminster parties for them to, post-Brexit, depart from that view. I mean, who's campaigning to say, oh, post-Brexit, what we've got to do is give a lot more power to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland? I mean, it's just not going to happen.
You don't think the fact, though, that if we didn't have oil and gas and some of the other resources that we do have, they would be quite happy to say, you can have independence any day you like because we don't really care. But it's quite different for them because they have no resources really to speak of. But there is a growing feeling, you see it on Facebook, there is this growing feeling of we would like to be independent, we don't want anything to do with the other countries.
Well, I'm not a great devotee at Facebook ever since I started being attacked for going in a jolly to Mosul. But I mean, the way in which I would see it is, I can go back to how I started this, talking about my dad, remember, telling me stories about what I had. There is a sense of a belief in their ultimate right, this sort of, what you might say, this imperial outlook on matters, right? I mean, what you've got to remember is the collapse of the British Empire that took place was fought against by all sorts of people in Parliament. You know, it was a hard-won fought for many people to get their independence. It wasn't because all of those other countries were rich, right? But there was this feeling of entitlement to rule. And you know, you only need to listen to Jacob Rees-Mogg and others, the way in which they talk. I mean, that has not departed the scene. And so there's cultural and political prejudices, I think, are perhaps even more important than doing a sort of inventory of who's got the assets here and who's got the assets there. I think there's more this feeling of entitlement.
I see that there's very little real demand for an English Parliament because they already have one. It's called Westminster.
Yeah.
They don't think of that. But I don't think it's they want us to remain just to keep hold of the oil. I think it would be seen as a terrific slap in the face for the United Kingdom internationally. The United Nations would then be saying, well, wait a minute, why is this lump sitting on the Security Council with a permanent veto? You know, there is no logical argument for the United Kingdom to have this status in the United Nations now. And if they lose us, that becomes even more precarious.
Yeah, I mean, I basically think that you're picking up on that point. That one thing that is likely to happen is that by exiting the way in which they want to exit, the Brexiteers, right, and take what you might call the sort of Little Englander mentality, it's actually not going to enhance their status in the world scene. It's going to further diminish it. And I think people will start questioning more rigorously about the UK's representation in a whole host of international
Well,
law.
isn't that the case why we got devolution in the first place? After '79, 4 SNP members went to the United Nations and started the ball roll. And they were threatened with this, what was that committee that they were sitting on? Their seat was threatened if they didn't have devolution. And that's why they went to the vote, that's why Blair went. It wasn't because he was feeling good in his heart about it, it was because he was forced into it.
I think, for me, the most important thing, and it forced the hand, was the growing sense of the desire amongst the people of Scotland to want change. And I think fundamentally that was the most important thing. And that's why I say what we've got to do is create that writ large now to get that going again.
You mentioned Rees-Mogg being a typical Tory Little Englander. But Jeremy Corbyn came up to Scotland to sack Kes Dugdale from the Labour Party and said on the TV that Scotland was a country of England. And so you can't just talk about the imperialist perspective from a Tory point of view. It's throughout both or all of Westminster, of Britain, of people here in Scotland, here that teach A levels in the private schools, because it's a superior course. You're walking down the Royal Mile and you've got Bruce and Wallace at the gates of Edinburgh Castle, and you've got this party, this imperialist bullshit called the Royal Military, Edinburgh Military Tattoo, every August, with all the Highlanders in their fancy dress, with their bagpipes, you know, taking our culture, exporting it as the tartan shortbread bullshit. And you're walking down the Royal Mile, and you're looking inside St Giles Cathedral, and you hear a guy talking about Ian Wood being the latest member of the Royal, was it the Royal something of the Thistle? Okay,
Is it?
okay, it's
I'm
on
sorry,
the
I'm
wall.
not up in.
300 years, 300 years of traitors to Scotland. They're all part of this royal carry-on called the Order of the Thistle.
Right.
And Ian Wood was made, Sir Ian Wood is another one. We've got so many of these imperialists in our own midst, maybe in your own party. Definitely, for certain in the Labour Party in Scotland, and the unions in Scotland.
I mean, yeah.
We're in a mess.
I know what you're saying.
We've got to get it out there and expose them. Or
What,
not.
what I would say is that
Excuse me.
I'm just trying to think the best way of putting this. As we look towards the future, what we've got to do is look towards the future, not be hang-strung by the bad things of the past.
That are still there.
I'm not denying that. I think the way in which we are going to win is by inspiring people to think we can be much more ambitious as a country. There are things to be achieved that cannot be achieved unless we exercise the power and the responsibility of ourselves. So I personally think we have to frame our campaigning in a positive way. I have to say I don't like some of the stuff from our own supporters that I see at times on social media, right, which is so negative, I wonder who they think they are trying to persuade by that. I don't think people are persuaded by some of the vitriolic abuse that takes place, right? I think we need to get a stronger handle on being more positive, showing greater ambition about what we can achieve together as a people. I think that will be attractive. It will be attractive not only for me, it will be much more attractive to young people. The difficulty of people of my vintage is that there's too much of a tendency to go back to, you know, there were these bad things that happened 30 years ago, 40 years ago. I can recite all the history of it. You know.
Or even 4 years ago.
Or even 4 years ago. I know. Whereas what we've got is, we've got 18-year-olds, 16-year-olds, hopefully, who will be voting in the future. And this is like the equivalent. This is like the equivalent of the Napoleonic Wars to them, going back as far as I can go back, or Randall, right? And so, we're not going to win by having a very restricted, backward-looking view, right, of the way in which Scotland has been done down. I think we're going to win primarily by saying, here is what Scotland can be.
And we need to find that confidence again.
Absolutely. If we don't get confidence, we need confidence to win.
Yeah.
A lot of our opponents need a lack of confidence for them to keep in control.
But surely it's important for the youth, especially, because we were just talking, we we knew more about the Battle of Hastings than anything. I'm not talking battles, I'm talking about our history. We're two countries, and they're two signatories to the Act of Union. The youth needs to know that.
I'm not saying people don't need to know that. What I'm saying is it's not enough to know that. Right. What I mean is that the young person who's starting out in their life, they want to have some sense of, you know, it was like the story at the very beginning I told of my brother. Right? The equivalent of my brother today needs to know there's some kind of future worth staying for.
Mine's in Brazil for the same reason.
Yours in Brazil, right? And so we need. That's what they need, and that's what they deserve. They deserve a future here built for them. They can choose whether they want to stay or go, but there should be that option available to them. And that's what we need to bring, particularly to young people, to be inspiring. And in that way, we'll get more of them coming in and campaigning with us.
It's actually a really good quote there. The best way to predict your future is to create it. And we need to create a future that people want. You give them the...
Yeah, that's exactly.
I can give them a
250,000 European citizens that live in this country.
Sorry?
The 250,000 European citizens that live in this country, they voted no in 2014 because they're lies. They don't have this history I was referring to in the past.
No.
That doesn't interest them either. They're interested in the future, their future. And so we've got to grasp their votes and communicate with them.
I mean, one of the things that I am, I don't know, proud is the right word, but I'm happy about that I contributed was when I was on this thing set up by Nicola called the Growth Commission, the bit that I looked at was immigration and looking at the way in which we would want to welcome people to, and the way in which we would want to grow opportunities for people to come here. I think that speaks to the kind of society we want to be. And it's those kinds of messages that at the moment are not getting out, but that we need to strive to get out. You know, so the type of society we want to create, the futures we want to create, you know, that to me is going to be fundamental in winning.
Doesn't help much when, sorry,
Can we look at our smallest self-governing neighbour, if you like, the Isle of Man, the size of Kirkcaldy and Dunfermline put together. Self-governing, part of Great Britain, not part of the UK, and they seem to survive. Can we not maybe co-opt someone from the Isle of Man to come and do a bit of G'ing up?
Well, I'm fascinated you say that because one of the things that when I was an MP I had was quite a lot of contact with the Isle of Man. And I knew two of the First Ministers in the Isle of Man and was over in the Isle of Man looking at things. Right? There are certainly some things that they do for themselves, not just because they have to, but because they want to do it. And so I think there are elements of that that feeds into my belief that sometimes you will achieve things like this. You will achieve things if you want to achieve them. Right? What will you achieve if you want to achieve nothing? You're going nowhere. You're just living with what is handed down to you. So we need to raise people's aspirations. Right? And that to me is a big challenge, particularly at the current time where there's all this uncertainty over Brexit, because a lot of people are struggling to see, well, what kind of future do we have? You know.
I think it's a bit simplistic to imagine that, you know, Brexit's going to be so chaotic and disastrous that as a direct result of that, huge numbers will become persuaded independence is best.
Oh, I
That's
agree
too
with that.
simplistic.
In fact, indeed, some social scientists have said the reverse might happen. Because what it will do is it will put people, if it puts people under greater pressure and they feel pessimistic, we don't get support of the pessimists. We get support of the optimists. So, indeed, there is absolutely no guarantee whatsoever that if there were going to be a catastrophic Brexit, that anything will be handed on a plate to us. I don't think anything at all will be handed on a plate to us. We've got to do a lot of work to get things, to get the tide to turn more fully in our favour.
You were talking earlier about or the number of young people coming through now who will be eligible to vote. Anne and I volunteer in our local food bank, and we've got a young guy who's joined us in his last year of his degrees doing politics and sociology, and he needed a placement, so we asked if he could come to the food bank. He's very interesting to talk to, because I just asked him outright what he thought of independence, Brexit, and what young people thought. Well, I got his opinions on both of those, and then he said young people are very, very clued up these days on politics because of what happened in 2014, and he said that the students involved, especially in politics, will go back to the likes of 79 when they started moving goalposts, and he said they know the chain of events that has led us to where we are now and why we need to move forward. And I said, do you think that will be a lasting effect? And he said, yes, because they actually find out all that information and then start talking to their parents and their grannies and their aunties and friends that they've got who would be, oh, well, I don't think we can really do that. And he said you would be surprised how the message is getting out through the younger generation.
There is certainly quite a lot of academic research that indicates that the younger generation in Scotland is more aware of issues than elsewhere in the UK, right? Which is good. That should be grounds for us saying we need to do more work with them. And sometimes it's not highfalutin ideas that you need. But one of the best initiatives I heard of a few weeks ago was I was talking to a guy, I don't remember the name of the branch, but it's up in the Aberdeenshire way, and I was just saying to him, how's your branch going? He says it's going amazing. He said, because of an initiative that somebody suggested. And I said, what was that initiative? He said, they just said to everybody in the branch, what we want you to do is to sponsor somebody as a member. And we suggested sponsor somebody under the age of 25 who wouldn't have the money nor would think about joining. If you can get them persuaded, why don't you as an adult, if you're in employment and get a reasonable income yourself, why don't you pay to sponsor that young person as a member? That was the party. You could do the same with the Yes Movement. Get people to be sponsored, to be part of it. And that way it might break down some of the barriers to engagement. I mean, his view is that the branch now had more active young members coming along because of that. So I thought, well, there's a good wee practical idea that seems to be having a difference in one place, be worthwhile thinking about. So there might be lots of ideas that we need to think about. How are we going to get engagement?
You know, I happen to know personally that Roger's parking ticket's about to run out. But finally, I would just like to ask Roger, what currency are we going to use in an independent Scotland?
Well, I don't know
the elephant in the room.
I don't know when independence is going to be, but I think the rational position at the moment, right, and the rational economic position at the moment is to say that what we should do is for an unspecified period we should use sterling, and it should be, because I believe in independence, it should be up to a Scottish independent government to decide what currency is in its best interest. It shouldn't be for me or anybody else today to say it's got to be something alternative at the moment. So I think that's best left to judgment. I think what we should do is we should put in place the infrastructure so that people can make that choice.
Excellent. Can we give Roger a big round of applause? Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks very much. And the next time I come back, I'll have my wallet, so I'll be able to buy something. If you don't mind, I'm going to head off because there's visiting up until 4:30. So I might surprise Barbara by getting the last half hour. Okay.
Thank you
Thanks
so
a lot.
much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.